dramatic, and so I enjoy my time there when I'm there, and um, hope you're enjoying your time while you're there.
Oh yes, yes. I'm on the south coast. I don't know where you came on the south coast.
Um, is Bristol on the south coast?
Well, it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. Anyway, so I stood on the dock where the ships that were going to America were leaving from, and
Right, right. Yeah.
so I don't know. I don't remember where that was,
No,
but
no. Well, that's
it's kind
quite
of like I kept.
that's quite a topical place at the moment.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I don't know if you've heard, Shariff, the demonstrations and the
Oh,
breakdown of
that's where
statues.
that's happening. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, now I know. Yeah. Yeah, now
The toppling of statues at the weekend
yes.
and all sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about all that. Okay, go ahead.
So maybe those are things we can come to in the
Yeah.
course of our conversation.
Right.
So I mean, we went a little over time today. We may do the same again this evening, but I'm conscious of time, and obviously it's evening time for those of us in the UK. I'm conscious also, Shariff, you're an incredibly busy person. You've got your series of seminars coming up, so don't want to take too much time away from your planning and preparation. So firstly, a huge thank you to you for coming again today.
Thank you.
For those of you who've not been here before, this is Shariff's third time with us. He first met with us on the 26th of May, and several people who were here, I think you enjoyed the conversation. Lots of questions came up, and we said it would be great to come back again so that we can explore those questions in more detail. Suffice to say, this afternoon we had a really in-depth conversation, and I think we were talking then about perhaps the need to have further conversations about the issues that came up, but that's for another time. For the purposes of this evening, the focus is really, I mean, we've talked about, and Shariff and I came up with the title of creating a world that works for all, stroke inclusivity. And it's, I guess, the foundation of your work, Shariff, is creating a world that works. And I'm also aware that it's about consciousness, inclusivity, leadership, and so on. So hopefully in the course of today, we'll be able to explore some of those concepts. As I've mentioned, as people are arriving, we will be recording, so you'll be able to pick this up. The way I'm going to manage the conversation is to keep everyone muted. Shariff will give us, what, 10 minutes, Shariff, introduction?
I'll work on 10 minutes, yes.
And then we'll open it up for conversations. I mean, what I've suggested is maybe creating a world that works as your overarching vision, share some of that, then pause, then we kind of go into consciousness, leadership, and so on. Let's see how it works anyway. Does that feel like a plan?
Yes.
Excellent. So with that in mind, again, because not everyone may have met you before, Shariff, you might want to start with a little bit of an introduction about you and then go on to sharing where you're coming from on this topic. Is that okay?
Sounds good to me. So thank you for the second time today. And thanks for the opportunity to chat with all of you. I want to, I like the having the opportunity to say a bit about my work, and then to say a bit about some of the themes that are going on for us here in the United States and around the world now. And humanity is being brought together in some very interesting ways. Humanity, I'm looking at how we have been affected by COVID, although the effect is very different in different countries, or actually different regions of the same country. The effects are all of us have been affected by it. Similarly, what happened with the George Floyd murder has affected people from around the world. When I grew up, what has affected people around the world is a common day occurrence. This was basically how the police treated us, and there wasn't a whole lot of recourse about it. And I, on the one hand, I'm glad that I'm of the age now that we as a human family are finding this intolerable. We as a human family want to find a solution to it, and we're experimenting with various solutions. I'm also dismayed that that we as a human family are still dealing with this issue, or all of the issues, and I want us to unpack them in a way that will be meaningful for us. My own relationship to the police was always very interesting, and there are a couple of incidents in my life where I was in a demonstration and the police beat me into a hospital. I was paralyzed from my neck down for about 3 days. And it's very disconcerting seeing doctors coming into your hospital room and sticking pins into your feet, and nothing is happening for you. And in another incident, a a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, stepped in front of a bullet that was meant for me. He got it in the gut, but it was meant for my head. I should say this is a police bullet. There are lots of bullets flying around Camden, New Jersey. And and I have to say, he didn't mean to do that. It wasn't like he was trying to save my life. He just happened to walk in the way when they were shooting at me. Now, at those times, I had a ton of anger. I had lots of feelings of frustration, lots of feelings that I wanted to hit back. I got hit, so I wanted to hit back. And I've had to unpack all of that and unpack it over the course of, 5, 10, 15 years or so, to the point that I can be non-reactive when these situations come up. I can recognize their responsibility and their culpability, the police culpability in the situation, but I can also take my responsibility. I can take responsibility for my actions and not blame and not look at this just as a one-way street. I've said in our previous calls that if we are going to change the society, all of us have to change. That means that I have to change. Okay, it doesn't mean all of us have to change, starting with you over there. Okay, and by taking the responsibility to call for that change means that I have to take the responsibility for all of the steps that come from that that situation. So I'm going to share another Camden experience with you that has to do with leadership. As I said earlier, I helped at 11 years old. I helped form an organization called the Black People's Unity Movement. And by the time we were a force within Camden's political, economic, social, cultural life. the authorities were constantly trying to connect in the BPUM with the drug trade to kind of tarnish our reputation. We, of course, knew who was behind the drug trade. The police were behind the drug trade. They made lots and lots of money by making sure that the flow of drugs was moving in Camden. So when I was like maybe 17 or so, we decided we had the youth arm of the organization. We kept the youth arm separate because we were doing all the illegal stuff, all the stuff that could get you locked up. So it's really hard to lock up teenagers for things that they would be happy to lock up adults for. So we decided that we were going to start to follow the cops around and to get the goods on them so that we could prove that they were behind the drug trade. And so my job was to give various assignments that, again, we all knew who the cops were. So you're going to follow Smitty and Jones, and you're going to follow so on and so forth. And I gave an assignment to one of my friends, Gene Carrington, and he followed his cops a little too closely. And they found him, they hauled him into an alley, ripped the sleeve of his arm, the arm of his jacket off, and filled him full of heroin, shot him up, and he died a very horrible death. And that shook me. It shook me for the longest time. For the longest time, I refused to take a leadership position in any organization because I got my friend Gene killed. And the question behind what you are willing to do and with whom you're willing to do it is a function of how strongly you believe in the righteousness of your cause. When Martin Luther King was leading the Birmingham bus boycott, and a very spiritually sick person put a bomb in a church and blew up 9 children, there was probably tremendous pressure on him to call off the boycott. It's like this just got too expensive. But in honoring the spirit of those children, the sacrifice that they made, he didn't call it off. And the results is part of our history. So I don't pretend to that what we're dealing with is life and death issues, but we're dealing with our own lives and our own deaths. And when I death, I don't mean when the meat body stops, but the death of the spirit that's inside of us. And if we're living that spirit, and if we're living with that spirit, then I think that we rise above those moments. Okay, so I as you know, I can keep going, but I will wait to say any more to see which direction we want to go with some of that. Yeah.
Right. So 2 things there came up for me. We all have to change. It's not just for those over there who need to change. And it sounds to me, you didn't say these words, Sharif, but what price are we prepared to pay for leadership or leading on certain causes that we believe in? And I wondered whether is that something to do with purpose as well, but maybe those are my initial thoughts, but we'll come back to that. So others, questions, Steve, Martin, Brendalyn. Hi, Brendalyn, nice to see you. Michael, others got any questions, any initial reactions to what Shariff has said? And you can unmute yourselves, or I'm happy to unmute you.
Hello? No one speak? Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
I'll go on. I thought Steve was going to speak.
Yeah,
After you.
go ahead, Steve.
No, after you.
Okay. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
I just got a couple of points just on the beginning of Sharif's sort of opening salvo there. I hope I don't get this reputation of just being sort of the naysayer all the time. But on the first thing, something that he said, he was really glad about the response to the kind of the transnational nature of the response to the George Floyd incident and Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff. He felt that there was a unity amongst the human family, and and that's something I straight away don't think is true or fully accurate. I think this is still a there's still tension and conflict around the very question of how you define, whether this was an incident of police brutality. Is still a question for many people. Whether the phrase Black Lives Matter is a controversial phrase or not is still a point of a dispute. Whether this is, whether the protests are valid or not, or whatever. All those things are still, there's still a lot of, sort of cultural tension between the two cultural tribes. It's still a question. So I'm maybe not as optimistic as Sharif is in terms of his assessment of where we are right now. But
Martin, I don't mean to interrupt you, because I think I may have either misspoke or overspoke. So I want you to respond to what my intention was.
yeah,
These are both of these events, COVID and the George Floyd murder, was are global events that have touched humanity. Now, what we've done with it, we're all over the place. Okay, but I don't think that there's anybody who can say, oh, I never heard of COVID. What's that? Or someone who says, I don't know anything about a George Floyd. I don't know what that incident is. I don't know who that is. Is he a basketball player? So what you do with it, and I have seen, and the demonstrations in Portland, some of them have been happening literally right outside my window. I mean, literally, I'm looking. I could look at it from this position, and I'm conflicted about it. So I just want to make sure you were this is not a matter of our unity and unity of purpose. This is a matter of our unity in that we're all having a common experience.
Yes. No, I totally understand. Sorry, I think I totally understand your point now.
Yeah.
That sort of dials into what my other comment was going to be about your sort of the first part of your opening statement. I think what is interesting with phenomena like COVID or the George Floyd situation, or just the sort of the tension between, as you characterize it, the left and the right worldwide, or whatever, how you put it, is while I think there's a lot of civic tension within nations, I think there are these sort of new transnational groupings and movements that people of like mind can connect with, through technology, can connect with others, and and they can sort of work together for a common purpose. And I think that's something that I think is really encouraging, because as I take the topic of our discussion, changing the world, I'm not so much sure if we could change the world, but I think we can change our tiny corner, however we define it, and our allies are from all over the world, or can come from any nation in the world. So I think it's kind of, there's a sort of a decentralized, perhaps you could say more democratic kind of movements that spring up as a consequence of technology, and affords us great opportunity to make new kind of, you could almost say, yeah, new civic structures if you want. Maybe that's slightly hyperbolic, but we can find new ways to, you know, sort of connect with like-minded people and work to common purposes. You know, to some degree, may not be super radical. It may be in small ways. It may just be, you know, discussion forums like this. But you can kind of find new senses of community through technology, being able to access many people who are on the sort of same page as you. So that's my initial sort of thoughts on what you said. I don't want to hog too much time.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I'm going to suggest we listen here, Steve, and then pick up back with you then, Shariff. So Steve.
Yes, really interesting. Trying to make a broad assessment of the linkages between the COVID phenomena and the Black rights phenomena. It just seems to me that what these events are doing is they're entering the human consciousness to make us question the sort of things that maybe we thought about but didn't give much attention to, and it's brought a number of things into focus. Questions about the status and authority that people have about what is fair for different people in different situations. To what extent is fairness an issue of sameness, or is fairness an issue of difference? It struck me about what people were looking for is the certainty, and therefore grappling with the uncertainties and the inequalities and injustices that come out of that. I think my point is it's raised that awareness, and I was interested at what point did you, Shariff, come to a point of realization that the way you were thinking before about the issues you were facing in your community and affecting your life personally, what was the realization that brought you to a shift of mind? Was it a religious belief? What was the enlightening? What was the awakening that happened in your mind? I'd be interested to know what caused that or what led to it.
Me too.
Thanks, Steve. So just Shariff, before you come in, let me just pick up whether anyone else from the participants on the line, you want to either wave your hand or drop me a note in the chat box to let me know if you want to ask any questions at this point, and I'm not seeing anything. So over to you then, Shariff. Martin, did you? Oh, no, sorry. Okay, go on. Sorry, Shariff.
So let me respond to some of what Martin was saying, and Martin, you sparked something when you started talking about transnational movements, and because that's one of the things that we're seeing now. We're seeing through this very distorted window of mainstream media. And I've been trying to move away from that window, but there's some aspects of that window. It's a very big window. So you get to see some things that may be happening around the world. But I was thinking about this in terms of a Gutenberg moment. Okay. So during the initial spark for the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther was busy nailing his theses to the church door, if he had taken his theses and nailed them to the church door, the church would have arrested him, tried him, convicted him, and turned him into barbecue. The fact that he nailed the theses to the door and also took it to the printing press, and thousands of copies of this go out around the region, the church isn't able to do what the church normally does in that situation. So what at that point in time was the internet of the moment. Okay, the fact that up until that moment there was like this one voice, and you heard it from the king, or the other voice you heard it from the bishop or the cardinal or the pope. All of a sudden you've got this guy with this really big voice that can pass that voice around to lots and lots of different people. So during the first night of the insurrection activities around the Floyd murder, I'm I'm actually sitting on the arm of this chair here because I can get a better view of the street action going on out here. And simultaneously, I'm looking at 9 different different phone feeds from around the country. I'm looking at Houston, I'm looking at Dallas, I'm looking at Phoenix, I'm looking at New York, and so I'm looking out my window, I'm looking at all the stuff, and I'm looking at my window, and I had this moment that this is the first time we've had to be the technical ability to bypass distance, bypass authority, bypass the filters of somebody's editorial office, etc., and just look at what's happening on the street and make your own mind up about what's going on. And so, and just like with Martin Luther and the Pope and the printing press, etc., we don't know where this is going. we are in uncharted territory, and I think that all we can do is maintain our moral stance, maintain our moral convictions, understand what our goals and our visions are, and I think that largely right now we don't understand what those things are. One of the reasons why the phrase Black Lives Matter is so controversial is that different people are putting different spins on that, and some of those spins are frankly getting into territory I disagree with. I just was asked to speak to a group who says Black Lives Matter and all lives matter. There are lots of folks in the Black Lives Matter movement that disagree with that will no, we have to keep this. It's not that all lives matter, it's that our lives matter. And so I am well, I'll be to the extent that this is a new challenge and a new opportunity. I think that we have to watch very carefully as this plays out and look at what the next steps are.
So Shariff, can I mean, I'll pick up Steve, but hopefully you'll respond to Steve in a little while. So just kind of hold my question till Steve. But I guess I'm hearing on the one hand, COVID, George Floyd's murder, and that's the first time I've ever used the word murder because you said earlier it is murder, so I'm going to use that word. So you've said those are 2 potential points at which we can see the scope for change, but at the same time, I thought you seemed to be saying, let's wait and see, because I guess I was kind of looking for at what points, when do the opportunities for societal change come? What are the kind of leverage moments? And it seems to me these are 2 important watershed moments. And if not these, then what are we waiting for? But that's something to come back to. Just kind of pick up on Steve first.
No. Actually, let's deal with that, and then I got Steve written down right here.
Yeah. So what are we waiting for? If creating a world?
I'm hoping that we're not waiting in the sense of I'll see which way the wind blows and then I'm going to go that way. I am very I've already proposed from my perspective how to shift and change the policing apparatus to a 21st century model, and we can talk about that if there's interest, or you can go to that. I don't know if you've seen the video that I did that lays out those points, that my points on how to make that change. But while all this is going on and while we're moving forward, and I'm starting some conversations with a couple of the police chiefs that I know personally about, is it time for us to start talking about some concrete efforts at not police reform, but police transformation. I am remaining vigilant that there may be other opportunities for us to look at our future. Nobody saw COVID coming. I shouldn't say that. Nobody saw the aftermath of COVID coming. No one the idea of shutting down the economy around this virus, it was still mind-boggling for me. I'm still not grasping it. No one saw the casual atrocity of the George Floyd murder. It wasn't just that the cops killed somebody. It's just like that. That's what cops do. That's why you gave them guns. They kill people. Okay. If you don't want that to happen, then you've got to restructure the policing situation. It was the casual nature of it. It was the knee on the throat, and the guy had his hands in his pockets, And what was I was saying to someone recently, what was going through his mind was like, am I going to have a hamburger or am I going to have a pizza when I get lunch? This is something. A book that was very moving and important for me was Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And the subtitle to the book is A Report on the Banality of Evil. That evil is this 9-to-5 operation. Eichmann was just a bureaucrat. I mean, his job, some bureaucrats, their job is, counting pigeons or doing the weather, and his job was killing people, and making sure you kept a strict accounting of the killing. We like to think that evil is, Darth Vader with the helmet and the black cape and the deep voice and, I'm going to kill everybody. But evil is very ordinary looking and can stay that way as long as we don't call it out. This will then dovetail into Steve's comment of the kind of what was or were the moments of awakening for me. And I've had many. And it's kind of been this incremental, there was never a one epiphany, aha moment, I've got it, Hosanna, now I live my life the right way, etc. It's been a very incremental movement of coming to grips with the fact that number one, I had a heart, and number two, that heart was not developed the heart was developed by Camden, New Jersey, and therefore I didn't have my compassion exercised in such a way that I could live a life as a compassionate person. So I've had to develop that over time. So if I can give you 2 or 3 vignettes that were very important to me in how I in this development. So when I was 16 or 17, again, this is the middle of the Black Power movement, and we were all Black Power militants, and we were at one point we went to a restaurant, and we were sitting at a table, and we were loud talking, and virtually every word out of our mouths was a curse word. And there were several families around looking uncomfortable. And at one point, this white guy comes over to our table and says, "Excuse me, but I have my family here. Can you please keep it down?" And I turned to him, and the first words out of my mouth was, "You white motherfucker, you da 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 da," and I laid him out. He and his family got up and left the restaurant, and we thought that was the coolest thing, and we're slapping hands, etc. And somewhere way down in here, after that was all over, before that, probably as I was going to bed, there was something that bothered me about that. There's something that I realized that was wrong. Okay. Now, it was socially accepted. I mean, everybody thought I was really cool. I was very inventive with my vocabulary at the time. But there's something where I recognize this is wrong. This may be who I am, but it isn't who I should be. And that was something that helped me to change. Years later, I got married. I had a couple of kids. I go to a restaurant, and there's a table of young Black men, and they are running it down, and they are cursing, and they are laughing, etc. And my wife says, "You need to go over there and talk to them." And I'm sitting there for a while, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm saying I don't have the right to go over and talk to them. All that happened here was that the role got reversed. What right do I have to ask them not to act the way that I acted in that situation? But if you knew my wife, there's no question about whether I was going over there or not. I go over and I say, "Excuse me, I've got my family here. I'd appreciate it if you held it down." And they were, "Oh yeah, man, we're sorry. We don't mean to do anything." And that their reaction made me feel worse, okay? Because they responded like human beings. I didn't. And so it's learning from things like that. It's and learning how I can practice being an authentic human being. And that's, I think, the highest calling that any of us can have.
Right.
Especially high in a world that happens to celebrate inauthenticity, that celebrates shallowness, that celebrates all of the anti-virtues. So if you look at Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, and you take every one of the things where he said, "Blessed are," we downplay that, okay? And all the things he says were problems of the society, of the spiritual problems. We celebrate them now. So we've flipped everything on its head, and finding our path as a true human being is a challenge. Okay, now.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
Yeah.
Time, we're running out of time again, and things go really
Yeah.
quickly. Martin has got his hand up, and I also wanted to kind of come back to, I guess, building on Steve's question, and I don't know whether this was kind of getting into the consciousness piece, because that is such an important part of your philosophy and your ideas. And is this what you've just described? Is that what you mean by consciousness? And that requires, it seems to me, a huge degree of self-awareness and constant self-reflection and constant self-checking. So I guess one of the questions, and Martin, I'll shut up in a minute, is how do you start to build that discipline? Because I think it's a real big challenge, because not all of us come into the world with that desire, if you like, to be that self-reflective human being. So something like that to come back to. And Martin, do you want to jump in as well? And if anyone else wants to ask, Brenda Lynn, I can see you sitting there looking lovely. If you want to get in and ask a question, please feel free. I can't see the others because you've got your cameras off, but do feel free, even if you want to put something in the chat box. I'm keeping an eye on that.
Yes, no, thanks very much. I was just listening to what she was saying there. So I'm interpreting it as a, this is about sort of self, what was the word? It's kind of like self-actualizing, and I'm just wondering if that's what he means when we refer to the theory and the philosophy of creating a world that works for all, that essentially it's an atomistic sort of project. It's just something that we all do on our own. And if collectively we all do it, we're going to get this world that works for all, and this inclusivity that's sort of been promised by the head. I was just wondering if that's the methodology that he's essentially advocating, that we all have a sort of a self-reflexive, self-development kind of way of understanding, the route to improving the world. So that's my question.
Thank you, Martin, because that was also going to be my other question. So,
so let me respond to both of them by saying yes and no. The yes part is, consciousness is a key element in how we, all of us, see and interact with the world. Consciousness is the thing that lies at the heart. And you're absolutely right. You need to have some level of discipline, which is saying a lot in an undisciplined society. There was a soft drink commercial at one point in time that said, "Obey your thirst," which I thought was really interesting. That's exactly what we're doing. We're obeying all of our urges and thirsts, regardless of whether this is something that's good for us. The no part is, Martin, I think that what we are doing when we become more mindful is a de-emphasis of the self. Okay, and while I'm talking, I want to see if I can find this Einstein quote real quick in Creating a World That Works for All.
It's not no problem can be. It's not that one, is it?
No, shoot. Okay, oh, yeah, here it is. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. So Einstein is saying, we are the universe, and this hunk of meat right here is just a limited part of this universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Now, the Dalai Lama says something very similar to this. He says that to get away from our wars, our violence, our greed, our hungers, etc., we have to cease the preoccupation with ourselves. And we do that through the practice of things like compassion, tolerance, I would add inclusivity, and all of those things can be wrapped into this package that I call mindfulness, that I'm simply going to be mindful. Now, I'm mindful of myself as this person on this side of this screen that's gesturing in this way. I'm also mindful that I'm looking at a number of other selves right now, each of you. And there are a number of different native indigenous, I call keeper traditions, where they refer to you as just another me. You are my other self. So, hello, my other Shariff out there, okay? But I'm also very conscious of that tree out there is also another self. That tree and I share 75% of our DNA. It's amazing. So our challenge, I believe, is through the operation of myself, by me going into a meditation every day, by me reading certain things, by me restricting my consciousness away from certain things. There are some violent images I don't look at. I don't know the sound of Donald Trump's voice. That's not something that's going to make me a better person by listening to him. Okay. I don't watch television except for Perry Mason reruns. So I call this consciousness management. Now, your consciousness is always being managed. Most of the time, you're not the one doing the managing. I've decided that I am the one who should, could, and will manage the consciousness of this one.
Wonderful. Wonderful, really thought-provoking. Just want to read something from Brenda Lynn. So she says, I believe that awareness is grown within a larger context. We're not born that way and we shouldn't be expected to self-actualize by ourselves. We're co-creators in the world. I think that kind of reinforces what you're saying there. So thank you for that, Brenda Lynn. That's really, really wonderful. Thought-provoking. Martin, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to ask something else? No. Steve, I see you're reflecting.
Yeah. Gosh, it raises so many questions in my mind. I mean, the issue here is getting deeper and deeper for me. If in fact, if I understand what Shariff is saying, is that we ought to think of ourselves not as being separate minds, but as one mind. if we can see ourselves as one mind, then the problem we have, if we've got consciousness, is, as I think the Buddha suggests, that the problem for us, therefore, are our thoughts. And if our feelings are linked to thoughts, that's the way in which we lose connection with our existence, the world around us, and our connection with the world around us, because we're looking for ways of separating ourselves from this one mind that is concerned about the welfare of all living things of which we're a part. That's quite a compelling thought and idea. On a day-to-day basis, what I find in the work that I do is that people use their brains or minds to make sense of their situation and make sense of what's happening. And everybody makes sense of that world differently because it's their world. They're not sharing a world. And as a consequence, I think what you were saying earlier about the fact that the realizations don't just happen suddenly, they sort of develop and grow as you consider, well, what's the situation now? So what should I do about it? And then what action should I take? And when I've taken the action, then I think, oh, that's changed things. So what does that mean for me now? And what action should I take now as a result? So we're constantly trying to make sense of the world we're encountering. And that was the point I was trying to make about, COVID and so on, is that we are struggling all the time to make sense of the way we make sense of the world we're in, to try and make ourselves more effective at living in it. But I think I take Sharif's point that actually is a waste of time. If we really want to make a difference, we've got to see ourselves connected as one mind and see what is in our souls, that what makes us effective as human beings. Is it when we're trusting, when we're grateful, when we are cooperating, when we're compassionate with each other? If these are the things that make us happy, these are the things that make us love one another, then we're getting to the root of it. That's a lot. Sorry, I'm just unloading my brain.
Why not? Number one.
Okay, Shariff, can you hold on a second? Because I
Sure.
think Gwendolyn has unmuted herself. So
bridge the two pieces of wisdom here, Shariff, you landed, and Steve, you just talked to, of we forget that as we're taking on that new meaning making, because Steve, you described it very well. That's exactly how I experience it. It's like, okay, so what next? And wow, okay, and what next? But I think the expand and include, so we're forgetting that, one, we've got to expand our capacity to include more variables because it is complex. It's becoming more and more complex. That's why this issue of the police is our issue, because it's the perfect complex issue for our level of thinking or consciousness, I'd say. And I think in that capacity, we've got to let things go, and we need to unlearn as well, letting go of all of that which I thought I was yesterday. It's like, this is now in faster cycles. Like, yeah, I don't know myself. I have to be okay with that idea of this fixed self as more as fluid, so that I can expand and include. So I just heard those 2 points in those shares. Thank you.
thank you, Gwendolyn.
Well, thank you. And the only, so I agree with everything that Steve was saying, with one, not even an exception, but one refinement. And I talk about blended consciousness. I believe there is a universal mind, but I also believe that what we are doing right now on this call is beginning to soften the barriers and boundaries between our different selves. And we do that, people do that a lot, okay? We do that in religious groups. We do that in basketball games or soccer games. We do that in, dancing. We do that in making love. We do that a lot. What I'm asking that we do is do that blending on purpose, and blend not just with the folks that we're comfortable with, but just recognize that we have to open the floodgates for all of us. And since we're almost at the top of the hour, can I share some slides with you?
Of course.
Let's go. Okay, this says that you disabled my screen sharing.
Have I? I don't
So,
think so. Have I? Oh. I don't.
yep.
We'll have to be off at the top of the hour, but I'll say as long as I can, just in these moments. It's been great to be with
I'm
you.
not sure what I need
Excellent. Yeah.
to share. Okay, I've got my.
Okay, so I am not going to share my screen with you.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to tell you what I was going to show you, which is a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid is what I would call universal consciousness, transcendent reality. Some people know that as God, as Allah, as the Tao, however you feel like doing it, but it's the reality that transcends this life. Then there is a human consciousness, a human spirit. Then there's a human culture and values. Then on top of that, there are these system structures, patterns, organizations, etc. We've been trying to change the top. We've been trying to change our organizational perspective. We haven't been looking at how do we blend these cultures and values? How do we blend our consciousness? And then how do we blend all of that into a transcendent reality? That's where the real work is. We as this society, and for those of you who have read Creating a World That Works for All, you know what I mean by breaker society, the society of people that believe that they don't live in and on the earth, they live on top of it. And that group experiences what I call in the book spiritual starvation, which has some definite markers to it: anger and violence, going numb, overstimulating with drugs, etc. And that is based on a consciousness that says I am separate. And the consciousness of I am separate is based on fear. So while this heavily armed policeman has his knee on the neck of of Mr. Floyd, he's experiencing fear, and that's why he's doing it. And the only way we're going to address this situation is to get rid of that fear for him and for all of us. What happens when you're afraid is you try to control the situation, and what you were seeing in that situation was him trying to be in control. I am controlling this person here. That control gives us almost all of the negative energy that we've got as a society. It gives us all of the things like the violence, the war, the trying to control money by hoarding it, getting as much money as you possibly can, getting more money than you could ever spend in 10 lifetimes, and I'm going to try to get more. At what point in time do you say, oh wait, no, thanks a lot, I got a belly full right now, I got enough? And so, and I only know one billionaire that's done that. And so all of this gives, we need to stop looking at the smallest part of this pyramid, which is our systems and structures, and start looking at the larger parts of the pyramid, which have to do with my relationship to an ultimate reality, my relationship to you and to my other, and my relationship to creating systems and structures that actually respond to my deepest, I'd say desires, but I'd also say love. Yeah, how do we create that?
Well, that was going to be the million-dollar question, and because I'm conscious it's top of the hour, but I wanted to also ask then, if nothing else, if we don't have sufficient time for the that question, is from here, what can we do from this moment? What is a step forward? What is it, as you know, a practical action or something we can do from this point, having been together in fellowship, if you like, having this conversation together with you?
Well, depending on my schedule, we can have some more. Um, yeah, we'll kind of see how we work that out.
Mhm.
One of the things that my organization is doing is we're supporting two series now.
Mhm.
One of them that's more on the practical side. The other one's more on the spiritual transcendent side. On the practical side, we're doing the series called Solutions Beyond Diversity. And we will be looking at 5 issues that are key to getting a deeper handle on the situation than just calling somebody a racist or just saying Black Lives Matter. And I don't understand what that means, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's the vogue thing to say. The 5 issues being engaging the other. How do you engage those who are not like you? Deep identity, culture and perception, and I'm not remembering practicing inclusivity. Everybody believes in inclusivity, but nobody knows how to practice it. So I have some steps on how to practice inclusivity. And the other one is something else. Okay. So then on the other side is what I call paths of awakening. How do we wake up? Okay. How do we become true human beings? How do we practice mindfulness? How do we practice compassion? And I'm hearing an echo now. How do we actually practice love? Okay. And I don't mean cute fuzzy bunny love. Oh, we all love each other. But really, how can love be a powerful, vigorous force for our own transformation and the transformation of society? And those are coming up next week. And what I'm going to do is put some links in your chat box right now, if I may.
Yes, of course, that would be great.
And ta-da! Okay.
Oh, well.
Sometimes this doesn't work. Okay, so
Wow.
Now here's the deal. The Paths of Awakening is at 8 o'clock my time, so this is during your day. The Solutions Beyond Diversity is at 6 p.m. my time, and unless you feel like getting up at 2 a.m., it probably won't work for you unless there are enough people in your time zone that would behoove me creating another session, another series for you. That would be, if you had 8 or 9 people that wanted to do this, then I would create another session for you. So look at it, talk about it, and if not, the next time I offer it, which may not be until November, I'll think of a more accommodating time frame for you. And but who knows what will be happening in November? We have had quite a 2020 so far, and so we'll by November I may have moved to United Kingdom. Who knows? So I'll leave you with that. So those are some things that you can think about. I would, and again, I hate doing this because it sounds egotistical on my part, but I really would suggest that you get a copy of Creating a World That Works for All. It's got a lot of stuff in there, and it will trigger, if you read it, I think it'll trigger some ways for you to think about about each other, ourselves, and our reality differently.
Great. And one thing from me then, Shariff, because I've watched your YouTube video on the George Floyd situation. And one of the things that really stood out for me was you invited people to adopt the I'm a mender mentality. And I wondered if there's something you can suggest to us before we close tonight, unless Martin and Steve, others have had to hop off, unfortunately, because we're at the hour. But whether there's something, sorry, before you do that, Martin, Steve, do you want to have any final thoughts, comments, reflections to share with Shariff?
Well, I've found it very interesting, very challenging, and I'm thinking about the sort of work that I do day to day in my coaching, particularly with teams, where trying to get conversations going, to get discussion going around what is it we're trying to create, what kind of future are we trying to create for this organization or for a particular issue, and what is it that will capture your passion to commit yourself to make promises that you really want to deliver on. These are the questions that I think lie behind a lot of how do we change the relationships between us so we care about the promises we make, and we care about how we treat each other, and we care about being honest with each other, to try and improve the quality of conversation, out of which I think we can be more effective. So connecting of minds is a difficult thing, but it seems to me if we can find some common ground in terms of acceptance of each other, I think that's probably my definition of love, really, is that if we can connect each other through acceptance, that we're different, that we have different views, that we feel differently about things, but there's something that connects us. And if we can find out what that is, then we can put energy into creating something that we all value.
Thanks, Steve. Martin?
Hi, thanks. Really great. Really enjoyed tonight's discussion. And thanks, Shariff, for coming on and doing it. Lot of food for thought, really, I'm left with. It's quite a challenge to be told, sort of, in a sense, it's the enlightenment problem, isn't it? It's about, to access this this great ideal. I can't think of a better word for it, but it takes a sacrifice, sort of a surrendering of something, and we are ego creatures that want to hang on to things. So it's a challenge to think about that. But no, I just think it's a really interesting way of looking at our problems and our society. Yeah, and I think I'll just, I'm definitely going to have a look more at some of the solutions that Shariff proposes. So that's been really interesting for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Martin.
Thank you. And
sorry, sorry,
Sorry, come on
yes.
in.
I am here. Sorry, I'm currently lying in my bed, half asleep, which is why my camera's off. But I have the.
Oh, come on!
I've got
that may be our most interesting speaker there. Yeah.
I've got a 6:30 a.m. wake up call with my my son that's back to school, who's also Martin's son. So Martin's got 6:30 wake up call as well, but he's downstairs. No, I've been listening to the conversation, and I missed it earlier, the conversation, but I just caught the end of it. I've found this whole year has been one complete, for want of a better word, mindfuck. Excuse my language, but it's a year, and I think it's a year that is going to define us, generations of us, not just ours, but our children's, and hopefully it will define what's to come for their children. We've had all kinds of things. If you remember January, there was fires all around the world. The world was actually literally burning, and then COVID coming through with China, I remember sort of sitting here thinking, oh my God, they've shut down parts of China, like the whole of Wuhan region has been shut down. How crazy is that? Only for it to then be done throughout the world. And then now we have George Floyd, not the first time we've seen a Black human being being murdered by police, and certainly not the first time in America, but the first time that has sparked rage in such a way that we haven't seen in my lifetime. But I don't know whether it's the collective of being in isolation, global isolation, and, you know, government's telling you to do stuff and you're doing it. And over here, you know, we're being told to do something and the government are doing something else. The rules don't matter to them. And in America, you know, Trump is more bothered about his polling stats than the fact that there are millions of people marching for social injustice. It's all of this. And I think humanity is at a cusp that, you know, when COVID started and all the lockdown started, you know, you started seeing sort of dolphins swimming in Venice and, you know, wildlife coming out and reclaiming the earth. And it almost was like, humans, you need to watch what you do and how you treat your environment. So we've gone from that message to this message that, yes, all lives matters, but in this instance, Black people are treated very differently in certain countries, and America being the most obvious and most blatant, which is why the hashtag Black Lives Matters comes out. And when people sort of debate and sort of say all lives matter, yes, of course they all matter, but we wouldn't have to say that if Black people weren't treated differently to all. And then this evening I watched George Floyd's funeral on TV, and Al Sharpton was preaching, and he preached hard, and he took no prisoners. He called, you know, he talked about NFL, he talked about Trump. It went on and on and on. And I sat here thinking, are we actually going to learn anything from all of this? What will we be saying this time next year? You know, all these companies, and I've been, you know, on Twitter and Instagram, all these big corporations saying, we will do better. We've heard, we're going to do better. We're going to change the way we do business. We're going to change what our outlook is. And I don't know whether it is just lip service, whether it's a trending hashtag, or whether they really will be accountable, whether we will see more minorities on boards, whether we will see more women on boards and in places of power and in government. And obviously all of this leads to voting. We all live in a democracy, and in America, it is a democracy. All these people marching the streets all need to register. They all need to register to vote and start to enact their change from there. But I just don't know. You know, my faith in humanity is one that is, I'm not sure it's going to change.
Thank you, Hannah. I mean, you've spoken all the things I've been feeling. On the one hand, I try and have a bit of positivity, thinking, yes, this is a seminal moment in time. You know, part of the reason why I started doing these sessions was really just to reach out to others who feel there's an opportunity here to do something different, to create a change. But there's a side of me, and I think Martin and I have had conversations in the past, you know, the Rousseau versus the Hobbes, you know, what's our essential views, you know, of this nature of human beings. And I swap between the two, because there are times when I want to believe change is possible. And then there are times watching last night's program, I think some of us watched The Windrush Generation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Shariff, but people who came from the Caribbean to Britain in the aftermath of the Second World War, so from 1948 onwards, who arrived here, who were British citizens then because it was still a colony or still a part of the empire, who lost their passports or their right to be here and were being deported left, right and centre without any recourse to justice. And it was, you know, the sense of helplessness that you feel is just quite phenomenal, and, you know, happening for the most part to people of Caribbean or Black backgrounds. Not the same, not to say it didn't happen for some white people, but certainly not to the same extent. So there are times when I feel positive, and there are times when I just feel like, oh, why bother? Just do your bit in your corner. So it was great to connect with you on the basis that here is an opportunity once again. So it's great to have Steve, Martin, Hannatu, and others who've been coming to the calls to say there is potential here. There are some people who believe it's possible. So where do we go from here? How do we keep the momentum going and don't lose the opportunities that have been created?
And do we have a clear idea, a clear vision that's coming out of our hearts of what we want to come from this? So just a quick wrap up of all three of our co-speakers here. When we were talking about the quality of the conversation and looking for the energy that connects us, the image that came to my mind was incremental enlightenment. Okay, so the Buddha sits under a tree and goes, got it, and he got it all at one time, and then he starts preaching it to the world. I don't think that's how the rest of us are doing it. And I think that each one of us we are in an enlightening process. 2020 is already a year for the history books, and it's just half over. This is going to be a really interesting second half here. The question that Hannatu asked, will we learn from any of this? I remember my watershed year was 1968. And in 1968, I honestly believed there was going to be a revolution in America. I believed that the government that we had was going to go down and that we were going to create a whole new government. And I wasn't the only one saying this. It's like, this is the time, this is our time. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets about the Vietnam War, the Black movement, the women's movement. It's just everything was in turmoil and everything snapped right back, okay? Now, one of the reasons it snapped back was that other than having this vision of the Vietnam War and that vision of women's rights and this vision of civil rights, and we didn't have that umbrella of saying, where are we going as a human species? Where are we going as a society? What's our global obligation to the future? And without that, everything snaps back. So I've been pushing the vision, the meme of we can create a world that works for all beings, not all people, all beings. Now, once we get there, then we have to ask the question, do we have the institutions that will allow us to do this? How do we achieve the goal of a world for all? What has to happen? I've got some ideas, I write them down, but all of us have to have those ideas. We need to start blending those ideas until we see what we come up with. I am confident. I remain confident. I've remained confident over the last 40 years. Every once in a while, it's kind of like, get me on a spaceship and get me off this rock. There's got to be intelligent life somewhere in the universe. But when I get to that point, I start thinking about the people who have been teachers for me. And that includes the Solomons, the Lao Tzus, the Buddhas, the Jesuses, the Rumis, this panoply of people who have been talking to us about who we are as beings. And then I remember also my lineage, and I believe that I have a lineage that goes back to Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Václav Havel in the Czech Republic and Nelson Mandela. We can have a revolution of consciousness. We can change our institutions literally overnight. We then have to be prepared for when that change happens. I've got this great quote that I'd show you if I could get my slides up, but and it's real simple. So it's Nelson Mandela saying, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And then when it's done, there's all these analysts that come forward and say, "Oh, this is how it was done. This was what produced this change, etc." But they couldn't see it happening 5 minutes before the change happened. So our challenge is, how do we respond to these things that are calling to our heart? And I am confident that if we hold true to an inclusive vision, that it'll happen. And that I won't be here 40 years from now saying, in my wheelchair, saying, "Okay, maybe this time, maybe it'll happen this time." I hope it's happening while I'm still vital. So thank you, and once again, I have no idea where time goes. It feels like we just got warmed up again, but this has been good stuff.
Thank you so much. As always, Shariff, I'm absolutely so appreciative that you take time out to come and spend with us. I'm looking to us as, maybe the kind of Europe, UK people who will be taking forward some of the things you've been saying and sharing with us. And certainly I'm hopeful that we'll see this as part of the umbrella of creating a world that works for all. So once again, a huge thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you to all the others who were here but have had to go. Blessings to you all, and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Shariff. Thanks, Lorna.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.
Till next time.
Till next time. Take care, guys. See you soon. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Lorna.
Bye. No worries. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to make sure I'm the last one off. So.